Oh dear. Let's see. Good evening. Am I on? Hello.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's so lovely to see you, and we're coming on to the holidays. It's remarkable. I can't believe the amount of people that are in the stores and on the roads already. And so pretty soon we'll get to our final swap of the evening of the year. But I want to, as always, thank you all for your participation and for coming to see us month after month. It's been such a joy. We have a lovely program for you this evening, and this is going to do most of the hosting as usual, but I have a little whatever, and so I'm kind of coughing it all. But I hope to see you at the end and tell you about a nostalgic Halloween. Anyway, thank you for coming. Enjoy our time together. Thank you for sharing, and let's begin.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So first thing that I have to say is that unfortunately, our featured teller for this evening is not going to be able to join us. Ruth Halpern was our scheduled featured teller, and I know a lot of you love and know Ruth. Ruth had a minor surgical procedure a few days ago, and even though, if you know her, you know how unstoppable she is, but you know, reality came up against that, and she's doing fine. We shouldn't worry about her, but she just couldn't. She wasn't recovered enough to join tonight. Not just she wanted to, and she wants everybody to know that she is very sorry. And we'll see about getting her back another month. Okay. So we have plenty of time, maybe a little time to schmooze or talk. We'll have a little announcement break in the middle of the program tonight. But I thought, especially since we have a small group, just before I introduce our first two tellers, that I've been seeing on some other swaps that people are unmuting at least at times. And I thought I want to invite everybody to unmute right now to do a little Halloween chant that I will lead. And then we're actually going to have our scary stories later in the program. But if any of you, maybe you know this from having kids or grandkids, or if there are any kids in your life, you might have an opportunity to do this with them this Halloween. So I'm going to put myself, I want to see the gallery view. Okay. So we're all going to be witches. You put on your imaginary witch's hat if you don't have it. And it goes like this: stirring and stirring and stirring our brew. And then we're going to go, woo! The librarians in the group, you probably have done this maybe. Okay, let's do it together. Let's see if we can all do it together. Stirring and stirring and stirring our brew. And then we tiptoe with our fingers. Tiptoe. Get up close. Tiptoe. And then we say boo. Boo.
Boo. Boo.
All right. It's good to hear everybody together. All right.
Sort of.
So thanks for doing that with me. So we're going to go to our storytellers. And I just say, if you know that you have a quiet background, and you would, especially at the end of the story, unmute to clap. You know, let's see how it goes with a little bit of audience reaction. Okay, so our first storyteller is Colleen Foley, and last month she said she had been to a very famous storytelling festival and she has a story about it. So please tell us about it, Colleen.
All right, thank you. In September, I went to the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival, which I have been wanting to go to for probably 20 years. But I could never get, I had to coordinate my vacations with other people and things always started up in September. So I never got there. But this year I said, I'm retired. I'm not going to put it off any longer. COVID is over. Well, not over, but people you can meet in groups again because it's not as virulent. And so I said, I'm on the road. And then I have my sister and my nephews live in Montana. So I decided to put it into one big road trip. Now, Timpanogos is in Utah. It's just north of Provo. It's at a place called Thanksgiving Point, which is in Ashton Gardens. So I'll start where I started. So I left my house around 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, and I drove all the way to Battle Mountain, Nevada, and I stayed in a nice motel there. And then I drove and that took about 8 hours. And then I drove from Battle Mountain to this where the storytelling festival is. It's north of Provo. It's south of Salt Lake. It's sort of in the between, and in a place called Ashton Gardens. And so I sat there. I got at the hotel around 3:30 or 4. I checked in. The storytelling started at 7. So I drove to Thanksgiving Point, caught a parking place. People were gathering. They were carrying and so I grabbed my chair and carried it on me, and I went in, and they gave me a wristband because I'd paid already over the internet. And I walked in and I walked down, and it was a place called Waterfall Arena, but the waterfall was turned off because of the drought. But it was still beautiful. It was still beautiful. And it was it was grassy. So, and then the stage was down here, but I thought they really made the seats comfortable. They had a section for children with no blankets or chairs, and they could roll down the hill. I mean, it wasn't a steep hill. They could roll down the slope, and it was nice soft grass. And so they were running up and down that part. Then they had a section for low chairs, and then they had a section for blankets, and they had a section for regular sized chairs, which I have to sit on because I can't get up anymore because I've had knee surgery. And so I sat there, and then at front they have some chairs you could rent that cost more, but I didn't do that. And so I was there, and I was comfortable, and I was thinking, but you get nervous because you think, I'm here by myself. I don't know anybody. But then a woman came and sat next to me, and we started talking, and she was one of the docents for the gardens, because there's a garden and a couple of kids museums. And so I learned the whole history of Ashton Gardens before the storytelling even started. And it was started by, I guess, a person who lived in the area had become rich. I think it was on like during the 80s in the computer boom. And he'd become wealthy, and he was driving down. He says, that looks so desolate. I want to do something. So he went home and asked his wife, and she says, good idea. And they started funding things or supporting different projects to make these beautiful gardens where people could enjoy. But you still have to have a membership. It's more like the UC Botanical Garden, which you always have to pay to get in. So, but it's still much more beautiful than it was, because it wasn't there when I lived there. And so the storytelling started, and it was wonderful. There were people from all over the world. Actually, there was a guy from England, and that's tellers included Donald Davis, Donna Washington, Doug Elliott, Josh Gofford, Lynn Ford, Megan Wells, Nestor Gomez, Randy Evanson, Reggie Carpenter, Simon Brooks, Tim Lowry, and our own Willie Captain was there. So it was really wonderful. And they all told a story that night, and it went on until around 9:30 or quarter to 10. And then I went back to my hotel, which I drove to. I didn't stay in, none of the hotels were within walking distance of the park. So I stayed in a place a little further away that was half as much and included breakfast. So I didn't stay in the recommended places. But you have to know these things. And so so the next day, and I thought, well, and the ladies that I was sitting next to said, well, maybe I'll see you tomorrow. And I says, well, maybe, but I never saw her again. But and then as our storytelling festival, it starts out with everyone, you go, they're all in separate tents. There's like one storyteller or two or three storytellers are in each tent, and they talk for an hour. And then there's a lunch break. And then you go back to more tents. And in the evening, there's all these, everyone tells another story again. And it was really, really fun. And actually there was a gift shop, autograph signing, and I bought this t-shirt at the gift shop. It says, life's a journey. Stories show the way. And I bought this hat, which says Timpanogos Storytelling Festival. And the program is really, it's like a medieval painting that someone did just for the festival. And it was just really wonderful. So the next day I went, and I always take some simple knitting. So I won't go between, stories. I wish they'd hurry up. So I could keep busy and not maybe pilfer something accidentally, because I don't have something to do with my hands. So I always knit a simple project where I can listen and knit. And this other woman was knitting, and she came over to me because she saw me knitting, and she says, I forgot my scissors. Well, I had some fold up scissors so you could fall down and it wouldn't hurt anyone because they fold up. And so I loaned her my scissors. And then we got to talking, and believe it or not, she was born in the little town next to where my sister was born in northwestern Wyoming. Except she's about 20 years younger than my sister, or 30 years younger than my sister. And I thought, it's a small, small world. And now she lives in Utah. And so it went on and on and on. And every storyteller was better than the rest, but I can't repeat their stories because they're their stories. But we had Donald Davis, who's like your grandpa, or maybe not my grandpa, my dad. And he tells stories of his childhood, and they're just wonderful the way he tells them. There was Tim Lowry, who went out in the audience and passed out little business cards to everyone. And it's like he wanted to meet everyone. And there was Maynard was there with Willie Chafton. And I can say I didn't get a chance to get close to him, but he looked at me like he maybe recognized me from somewhere else. So that made me feel good. And I had a wonderful, wonderful time. It only took me a day and a half to get there. But if you don't want to drive, you could fly to Salt Lake Airport and then rent a car. It takes about an hour and 20 minutes to drive to the place. And I had a wonderful time. I want to go back every year. I don't know why I put it off. And originally, the story, almost done. The story was up in American Fork Canyon, where there's a mountain called Timpanogos. And there's a really sad story connected with that mountain, but that'll be for another evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colleen. We'll look forward to that one if you want to share it.
Okay, and I learned that when I was about in second grade. It's very, very sad.
Okay. All right. So our next storyteller will be Bev Schwartz from New York. And then we're going to try and have Renu Narayan from Chennai in India after her. Yes, I can see you, Renu. We'll see how your sound is, okay? Okay, after Bev. Where are you, Bev? There. Good to have you back.
Thank you. I am happy to be back. I'm busier than ever, too. I'm just like, whoa, yeah. Okay, good evening. It's so great, just so good to see you all. This is one of my favorite groups. I really mean it. Okay, here we go. The kindness of Mrs. Solomon. A great teacher makes the difference in the world. Think about all the teachers that you had and which ones were great, that inspired you in some way. I was in second grade. In kindergarten, we were divided up into two groups. And from kindergarten through sixth grade, we were with the same kids every single year. So some you liked, some you didn't like. That's just life. Well, and I learned that why should I spend my time around someone I didn't like? So, I just did my thing and hung out with people I liked. I walked into my second grade classroom. And I saw some pink envelopes on some of the desks in the classroom. I didn't think anything of it. And I sat down and all the girls started opening up their envelopes. I noticed it was only girls, not boys. And I was the only girl who didn't get an envelope. So listened carefully to what they were saying. Oh, Susan's having a birthday party. Oh, are you going? Are you going? Are you going? It's this Saturday. Oh, yeah, yeah. Ah, Susan was having a birthday party. But Susan was a twin. And her twin and her and I never since kindergarten really got along. The chemistry just wasn't there. I kind of just stayed away from them, never really talked to them, sat near them in lunch, stayed away from them in art and music. I just didn't care for them. And I wasn't about to say something mean or not kind. So I felt the best thing to do was keep my mouth shut. Well, we had show and tell that morning like usual. We're sitting in a circle. And she said, "What's new? Does anybody have anything to say?" And Susan raises her hand. The first thing. "Oh, yes, Susan, what would you like to tell us?" "My sister and I are having a birthday on Saturday, and we're having a birthday party. And I've invited kids from the class to come." "Oh, how nice," said Mrs. Solomon. "Who here is going to the party?" And all the girls raised their hand, but me. Well, I wasn't upset because I didn't want to go. I didn't like them. And I'd rather be with my friends on Saturday that I had planned to be with. So, I just kind of felt this is just life. I had learned that some things you like and some things you don't. And I wasn't going to let it upset me. And she looked at me and looked, and I didn't raise my hand. And then she said, "Oh, does anybody else have anything to say?" And we went on with show and tell. I had a nice day that day and went home and did my homework and came back the next day. And there was one pink envelope on my desk. Well, I said, And I opened it and you got it. You guessed. It was a letter, a happy birthday note inviting me to Susan's birthday party on Saturday. I know what happened, I said. Mrs. Solomon did look at me a little strange, and she knew I hadn't been invited to the party. And she probably asked Susan, to invite me and told her, "If you invite all the girls, you shouldn't leave anyone else." Well, I knew she had probably done it. I didn't say a word to anybody. I stuck the pink envelope in my backpack and I went home. And it was Friday afternoon. I showed my mom the letter, the invitation. "Mom, I don't want to go." And I told her why. And she said, "Well," I said, "Well, Mrs. Solomon did go out of her way to, have her invite me. So, I'm not quite sure what to do." "Well, Bev, you're getting old enough now. You're 8 years old to start kind of knowing what's right and wrong, and you figure it out. And after supper, you tell me if you're going or not, because I have to make plans to drop you off and pick you up tomorrow. And we have to get a birthday card and a present. And I don't even know if the stores will be open, late tonight." Okay, so I went up and I thought. And finally, I knew what I had to do. I went down with the invitation and I said, I think Mrs. Solomon really likes me and she thinks she did a really nice thing for me. I really don't want to go, but I will go because of what Mrs. Solomon did. She said, okay, now we have to get a gift and we may have to make a card for both of them and a gift for both of them. Both. My mother said, that's the only fair thing to do. Well, the stores were closed. We couldn't go out. So my mother said, let me help you make two beautiful cards for them. We'll start with that. So we finished the cards. And then my mom said, is there anything that you have that you could give them that we could put in the envelope or a little package or something? I can't think of anything. And then my mother said the words that I dreaded to this day hearing. Well, you have a silver dollar collection. Maybe you can give them each a silver dollar. Not my silver dollar collection. Cousin Bobby gives me one every year. I have like 4 of them, 5 of them, and they're real old from 1890, 1895. Do you know how much they're going to be worth when I'm older? Can you think of anything better to give? No. Well, then go on up and bring them down. And I know you like the oldest one, so we'll take the youngest ones first. I brought them down and we took the 2 silver dollars out. It was 1899, 1898. And we put them in the envelope each and we taped it. And my mom said, you're doing the right thing, Bev. You're making the right decisions. I'm proud of you. I wasn't proud myself. I was about to pull my hair out. I was given one of my most precious possessions in the world. Well, the next morning, my mom said, I look forward to hearing how you liked the party. Oh, I said to her like that. And I walked in, stood up, put a nice smile on my face. And I walked in, happy birthday. They were greeting everyone at the door. And I handed them my envelopes and they put it on the table next to where they were standing. And off I went to get away from them as fast as I could. And you know, I had a nice time at the party because I liked everyone else in the class. And we sang songs, pinned the donkey on the tail and did all the stuff you do in little girls' parties. And then it was time to leave and everyone's saying, thank you, thank you. And I got to them, I said, you know, I had a wonderful time at your party, and put on a big smile, which I didn't want to say to them. And I hopped in the car and my mother said, well, and I said, I survived. I did have a good time, but I was polite to them and nice out of respect to Mrs. Solomon. Well, that Monday I went to school. And every Monday morning we had helping hands. We got to pick a job in the classroom and we had made hands and traced it on paper and we had our name on it, and which I did in my classrooms too. I copied what Mrs. Solomon did, everything I remembered. And she said, okay, Bev, you're first. Which job do you want? And I said, line leader. I knew exactly what I wanted. So when lunchtime came, she said, who's the line leader? You have to get in front of the class because you've got to walk with Mrs. Solomon and lead the class to lunch that day. Well, we started walking up a long hallway to the cafeteria. And I said, Mrs. Solomon? And she said, yes, Bev. And I held out my hand and she took my hand. And I said, Mrs. Solomon, thank you. And she said, you're welcome, Bev. She knew what I meant. And I said, Mrs. Solomon? And she said, yes, Bev. You know, I love you. Someday I want to be a teacher just like you. Bev, you're going to make a great teacher someday. I'm going to be very proud of you when I hear that you become a teacher. And I said, thank you. Well, I went on, you know, K through 12. In high school, I actually joined Future Teachers of America and I got to volunteer in classrooms. That's how much Mrs. Solomon had inspired me. I always would check out the teachers and their styles, and I knew what I didn't like and I knew what I liked. I knew who decorated rooms. I knew who did their homework before teaching, and I knew when they were tired and didn't want to teach that day. I recognized it. I was very observant. And then I went to college. And in college, I did two things. I had two jobs. One was in Head Start, teaching kids that their family were migrant workers working in the potato fields of Long Island. And then I would go to the other nursery school of rich kids. I knew right away what type of teacher I wanted to be, an inner city teacher, because they really appreciated everything you did for them. So I picked my student teaching in Troy, which was an inner city school, all project kids. Well, I graduated January early, a half a year early. I'd taken extra courses, and I put an application in to see if there was I could substitute or if there was a job in the middle of the year. And I got an interview because they fired a first-year teacher in second grade and they were looking for a new one. I interviewed, I held my breath. I said, oh, I hope I get it. I won the lottery. My first job was in second grade. Thank you, Mrs. Solomon.
Thank you, Bev. What a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tribute. Lovely.
Beautiful.
Yes. Unmute if you want to clap. Okay. All right. Continuing to move even further.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear? It's like there's an ocean behind you for me. Oh God. You can't. Lot of disturbance. Someone else? Morning?
Yes, there's a echo. But I think if we turn ours off.
Okay, let's all mute ourselves.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Can we try that? You and I will move you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hear you, but the background is... It's bad, is it? Okay. I don't know what's wrong with my mic because we've been trying to fix it, but
You're fine, Rennie. Yeah, we'll try.
listen hard. It's a real pain, isn't it, when you have to really listen close. I think there's something wrong with it, the connection or the mic itself. Hello, hello, hello. It's too loud. Can't hear me at all? No?
Yes, we can hear you, Rainy.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me clearly? No.
Yeah, suddenly it wasn't quite so loud.
1 second. Give me a second, please. Is it better now? No.
What do people think? Is that better?
About the same.
Yeah, then I don't think I'll tell the story today because I think there's some issue with the mic. I don't know, last evening it was fine, but today I don't know.
Oh, we're sorry. It is very difficult.
Okay.
Back next.
All right. So Manjiri, are you ready to go? Where are you? I'm looking for you in the boxes. There you are. Okay. So from one part of India to another part, I think, am I right? You're in Mumbai.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm in Mumbai. That's right.
All
Yes.
right. So we're thrilled to have Manjiri tell us a story. Please.
Thank you, Liz. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good evening. My name is Manjiri Gopte, and I'm telling from Mumbai. The name of my story is The Grizzly Ghost Trail. Here goes. I had visitors from Pune who had come for a wedding. And I asked them after the wedding if they wanted to go on a ghost trail. They were intrigued, a little spooked, but excited. We turned ghostbusters for the night, unraveling myths and urban tales about spirits, bhoot banglas, haunted houses, and also cemeteries. The guide took us to an old bungalow, which he said was built on a graveyard. He took us to S.K. Patil Udyan and showed us a square a slab of stone and a stone plinth hidden in the bushes. It looked like a grave and was very eerie. The guide told us that his family had lived in this locality for many generations, his maternal family. And he had grown up listening to these stories and myths about bhoot banglas, haunted houses, spirits, and cemeteries which dot the bylanes. The garden was the starting point of the trail, and it was chilly, everything associated with cold and dark things. As we entered S.K. Patil Udyan, he pointed out that it was built on a graveyard, and there was a myth that if a child got hurt there, he would not get healed very easily. It sounded frightening. In the 18th and 19th century, the stretch along Maharshi Karve Marg was used to bury the dead by different communities and religions like the Kachi Menons and the Daudi Boris and the Muslims. Later, this area known as Back Bay was converted into a residential zone as the town grew. The paddy fields and the coconut mangroves were converted into a residential zone known as Girgaon. He peppered his talk with historical facts about the private graveyard of Muhammad Ali Rogai and the Bombay dock riots of 1832. Later, he took us to JSS Marg, where there was a gate leading to the Thakurdwar temple, which was built by an ascetic poet to guard the neighborhood. It was a very auspicious spot, and he pointed to the well-lit junction. But our trail veered into narrow bylanes called wadis. One such was the Krantinagar Chaul, also known as the Sarkar Tabela, which housed horse stables and was so called. As we went ahead, somebody in the group told us that their father used to rent a flat there and at night could hear horses neigh. Ooh, that got us really spooked. He pointed to a roundel fitted in the walls of the building and said it could have well been the owner's, and it cast an eerie shadow on the ground. That really spooked us. And my cousins were looking at the guide with big round eyes. Then we went to Kota Chiwadi, which was a heritage precinct. And the guide told us to go back in time when there used to be a myth about a headless ghost who used to slit the throats of passerbys. He was called the legendary Man Kapya. Man, neck, Kapya, to slit. We went back thinking about how it must have been in those times, and we were totally spooked and frightened. Then we went ahead and he told us about how to unravel and spot an authentic spirit and more about ghost houses and cemeteries. And we saw some cottages, a few abandoned, which cast an eerie shadow on the ground. It was truly eerie and it felt chilly, everything associated with things dark and cold. Then the trail came to an end and we thanked the guide for telling us all these stories and myths about Girgaon. He pointed to a plaque just as we were leaving, and he said that this was a Christian burial ground. You will never look at Girgaon the same way again, he said. And you could be well walking on dead bodies, he chuckled. Then we headed home, and I knew we were not going to get any sleep that night. And so I had prepared some comfort food, batata vadas, potato patty, which were smothered in gram flour and deep fried, and masala chai to drive away the fear from our bellies. And we were so glad that we had left all ghostly things behind and were glad to be back among the living. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjiri. That was very atmospheric. And I could,
Thank you,
when
Liz.
you said the chai masala, I felt like, that would be very comforting. I love that. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Okay, so we're going to have a little break for announcements now. And then we have more wonderful stories after. The first announcement is that it is about November. There's a lot of wonderful storytelling events in November, but there is no Contra Costa Tail Spinners meeting in November. Our normal date always falls on Thanksgiving. And so I think most of us will be busy doing something else. But there are so many celebrations. So if you're not familiar with celebration, it started, I think, 40 years ago by now in Connecticut and has spread all over the US and even the other countries. The idea of bringing storytelling into the community on originally the weekend before Thanksgiving. And now it's actually spread out. There's so many of them, it's spread out over the months. And I know of the Storytelling Association of California is kind of sponsoring 3 online celebrations. They all have different days and different groups that are involved. And I'm going to put them in the chat, but the first one coming up, I think, is November 8th. And it is featuring Vicki Ness, who is here today. And this is from the Do Tell Swap. And she'll be one of the storytellers. And then Brandon Spars, who was our featured storyteller a couple of months back, is the host. And so I hope that you can see there in the chat all the information you need for that one. And then there is going to be a triple celebration on Sunday the 13th. And that one of the main groups involved in that is Delta Word Weavers, Marian Ferrante's group. Again, many of you know and love Marian and her group. She's, I think, the longest running celebration probably in the Bay Area anyway. So she's teaming up with Mixed Bag from Berkeley and community storytellers from LA. And then the last one will be Sunday, November 20th. And that is the Sacramento Storytelling Guild. That's Ed Lewis's guild, which we've seen Ed here many times. And a lot of us know Ed. And also the Inland Valley Storytellers. Again, so it's very cool that these are bringing different regions of California together. And because they're on Zoom, we could all attend, as many as we want. We really encourage everyone to support them.
You have several places where you say, click here to register, click here for the flyer. They are not coming through live.
They're not
You
coming
can't
through.
use them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for that.
But
Well,
here's what you do. If you click on it, it will give you the link, which you can cut and paste into the chat.
All right, thank you. Is that Storm? Who is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Storm. And also you can go to StorySac. Let's see, it's not working here. Storysac.org. That's the Storytelling Association. And there's a page for right on the left side. You look down the different choices. There's a tab for celebrations and all this information. That's where I got it all. So go there and you should be able to click what you need in that way as well. The other thing I just have to say is that I think I mentioned it the last time, but Brandon Spars, one of the hosts of Do Tell Story Swap, one of our neighbor swaps, and also our featured teller very recently, he was one of the new storyteller voices at the National Storytelling Festival that just happened in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And I couldn't go. Linda Yamoto went, who some of you know, but I got to attend a wonderful gathering where he and the other people who were telling at the festival for the very first time got to share what the experience was like. And that was a gathering of something called Assist, Artists Standing Strong Together. And it's a wonderful organization. So I want to put that, it's an organization that's open to anyone who is interested in storytelling. Quite a few of us on this Zoom right now have told stories for some of their programs, but they also have just gatherings where just to create community. And so that was so special to hear from Brandon and everyone else. So proud that one of ours got to be on that stage. So, okay. Any other announcements? You can put them in the chat. Please do. Okay, let's have some more storytelling. Yes. Our next storyteller is Jane Cole. And Jane has, we haven't heard a story from Jane in a while. And I hear it's a little scary and a little horsey, I think. So Jane, I'm very curious.
Well, what are folk tales and fairy stories and scary stories, if not some kind of boot camp for kids, if not a rehearsal space in your imagination for what might happen in real life? One fine day, I went out tramping through the hills to find my horse. After walking for a few miles and persuading her that we might go for a ride together, we rode back down out of the hills to the gate on the road. I slid off, opened the gate, led her through, and I was closing the gate when a car drove up and a man got out. People often pulled over to talk. They loved to ask questions about the horse, permission to pet her, and people are so sentimental when they tell you stories about their lives with horses. This man was dressed in work clothes, much like the clothes my dad wore. And he had a very rugged face, a face from working outdoors in rough jobs, a lot like most of my dad's construction worker friends. Across the street, there were 5 Morgan mares in a pasture, and their heads were down grazing in the tall grass. A few cars went by. The man came over and started asking the typical questions. What kind of horse was it? How old was she? When did I get her? Well, as he was talking, my horse, Lucky, was nudging me and pushing me and shoving me with her head. Every time she gave me a shove, I would have to take 1 or 2 steps further down the asphalt path that led about a 1/4 of a mile from the gate of the pasture to our suburban street. It was a transition between ranch land and suburbia. He kept visiting and she kept pushing me forward. Then he asked a strange question, I thought. He asked if he could ride her. I thought, strange, but okay. He hopped right on, but Lucky did not like him on her back. I was beginning to have a strange feeling, and I didn't hand that man the reins. Lucky was pushing and trotting. The man was holding on to her mane. She trotted faster and faster, and I had to run to keep up with her. The Morgan horses across the street lifted their heads up out of the grass, ears forward, and eyes locked on us. Lucky gave a little buck, and the man clutched on. I found myself gleefully, devilishly enjoying that this man was having to hold on and clutch so hard to stay mounted. Lucky was trotting with not her nice single foot gait, but with a really bone-jarring, stiff-legged little trot. As we approached the houses, the man said he wanted to stop and get off. He asked, where did I live? And I said, oh, right there. Then he asked another strange question. He asked me to go for a ride with him in his car. I said, oh, I can't. I have to get her home. And my family's waiting for me. I'm late already and they'll be looking for me any minute. What was I saying? I wasn't a liar. What was happening to me? I didn't live right there, and I wasn't the least bit late getting home. Lucky was continuing to shove me harder and harder. We broke into a run right past the house I said was mine, leaving the man to walk the quarter-mile back up the road to his car. Lucky and I cut around the corner and ran the 7 houses down to ours and straight into the backyard and down into the corral. My heart was thumping and I was breathing hard. I took Lucky down to the corral and I fed her oats and omeline. And I just felt very confused and very upset. I didn't know what had just happened. And I needed time to put the pieces together. I didn't tell my parents right away. After a while, I brought Lucky back up into the backyard. And leaning against her and petting her, I told my parents about this man. I know I stalled. I think it was because I didn't want my dad to get in trouble going after him. And I think it may have crossed my mind that I didn't want my mom pulling in the reins on the freedom Lucky and I had in the hills. When I was 27, this story became much more scary. It turned into a horror story. On the news and in the newspapers, there was a story of a young woman, 15. She was found walking naked on a road with both of her arms cut off. Because of her courage and her clarity, that monster was apprehended. I saw the police artist sketch she described and the photo of the man. He looked far too much like the man Lucky and I had encountered. And he was from our town.
Wow. Oh. Goodness.
Wow.
Thank you, Jane. Those stories are attached to, particular places. And you can see from that, your true story, where, how that can come to be. So thank you for bringing us a true life, scary story, horror story, told very well.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're all right, and that young woman saved others, I'm sure. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. How do I stop this? Okay, there we go. All right, let's take a deep breath. And one more. Okay. Our next storyteller is Claire Castell. I don't know I'm not sure what kind of story you have for us. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But Blair, tell us a story.
Well, it is interesting how animals feature in our stories, and I have a childhood story with animals, but probably not as scary as that one. My heart is still thumping, so that was disturbing. But when I was around 10 years old, my father was worried that his mother was getting really old and felt that his twin daughters, my sister and Carol, should spend a few weeks getting to know her. So he packed us up in his 1956 Ford station wagon. We traveled down to his parents' farm in Louisiana. It's southwest of New Orleans, about an hour and a half out of New Orleans, and past Thibodeau in the swamp country on Bayou Sally Road. Now, Grandpa Elmer had actually built the farm and the farmhouse with his own bare hands. He was a big, sturdy guy. And the house had a tin roof and a nice little porch. And he'd been a strong man and liked to hunt and fish. But he had passed. He had died in a hunting accident and some years ago, and while he was still in his prime. So that was one reason Daddy wanted us to go see Grandma. She was getting on. Now, Grandma was so happy to see us. But she had 3 rules. She said, don't leave food outside, don't sing outside, and don't go into the woods beyond the tree line. She didn't explain why, but they only were important. Now, we loved the farm. We spent our days roaming around on the countryside. She had chickens to play with. There were goats. She had a big black hound named Jeff, and we just had the best fun. There was a creek, but we didn't understand the rules. I don't know what's so important about these rules. What could happen? We said. One day, my sister accidentally left a bologna sandwich outside. And that night, we're all sitting around inside, my father and Grandma, and we hear something scratching at the door. God, what's that, Grandma? My father, oh, I think it's just a raccoon. Gets up. No, I'll check, Grandma says. And she came back in a few minutes. Someone left a sandwich outside. Girls, you remember the rules. And the next morning we went back outside to play, and there was long black fur on the back steps. Now, after this food incident, I became more aware about something was not being said. How kids have that sense that something's going on, but I don't know what it is. And I think whatever was at the back door was part of it. Well, one day I was by myself and I decided to follow the creek. It was very hot. It's Louisiana, and you probably all know very, very hot weather in the various places that we all live. Walnut Creek is probably the hottest place I've ever lived, but don't get me going. So Louisiana is just, when I'm wandering around now by myself and I walk in the creek, I've taken my shoes off and I'm kind of humming a new song that I'd heard on the radio. And, the creek sounds were, put me in a little bit of a daze. There were chirpy birds and there was bees, and then there was the wind rustling the trees, and I just kind of went into a sleepy daze. But all of a sudden, I noticed that everything was really, really quiet. The birds had stopped singing, and it actually had become a bit cold.
Now I looked around where I was and I realized I was on the tree line. I had gone too far, and I know that was one of the rules. So I turned around to go back to the farmhouse, and I heard a crack. And then I saw it. It was a large wolf, I think. I wasn't sure. It was walking toward me. But then it stood up like a man. And it was tall. It was over 8 feet. He looked like a man, but a wolf. He had big dog ears, and he was covered in long fur, and his eyes were yellow and glowing and shining. And then a low growl. And I stumbled backwards, and I tore through the woods, and I could hear the animal, the man, the wolf, whatever it was, behind me. And I ran over rocks, and the heck with my shoes, they were gone. I ran in the house, slammed the door. Grandma, there was a wolf or a man, or I don't know. And I'm just out of my mind. And she says, were you in the woods? She said, I'm going to tell you what it is that you saw. Sit down, girls, right here. Jeff will sit here and take care of you too. What you saw was, we call it the rougarou out here. In France, they call it the loup-garou, part man, part wolf. And she tells us the rest of the story, the truth. Your grandfather, Elmer, had gone hunting for a bear. It was killing animals nearby, and he had tracked it to a den, but it wasn't a bear. It was a man with long dark hair covering his body. His head looked like a wolf, and Grandpa Elmer was attacked by it, and he was injured. He came home that night, but he was very, very sick. And in the morning, he was covered in long hair, and then he ran off. And the thing you saw on the 4th today, that was your grandfather. He left because he didn't want to hurt us. And I leave food out for him at night sometimes, and sometimes I sing for him. And I think your grandfather's still inside that beast. And I hope someday he can come back from whatever it is that he's become. Well, a few days later, we went home. We grew up, and as I became an adult, Grandma had passed about a year after that, I started to remember that story a little more dimly each year. Like, did that really happen? You know, I was a kid. My sister didn't remember anything. So by the time I grew up and became an adult, I had decided, oh, that must have just been a really bad dream I had, you know. But I went back to Homa recently in 2019. Homa has an annual rougarou festival there now. And I learned that Bayou Sally Road is considered the most haunted road in Louisiana. It's now a 2-lane highway, and it heads on down to Cocodrie. But voices are often heard coming from the Choctaw burial grounds and from old slave cabins. And then they tell you to drive really slowly on that road, because sometimes an 8-foot tall man covered in fur jumps out to cross the road. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Claire. Great family story and ghost story wrapped into one. Ghost stories. I have a little ghost story for you. And this one comes from even further afield than we've heard yet. It's from Japan, where I lived for a couple of years. And but I need your help to tell the story. And so, first of all, if it's comfortable, unmute yourself. And I wonder if there's anybody here besides me who knows how to count to 5 in Japanese. Well, so in case you don't, I'm going to teach you now because it's going to come in. That's where I'm going to need your help at the end of the story. So I'll say, we're going to do it like that and just repeat after me. Okay. Ichi,
Ichi,
ni,
ni,
san,
san,
shi,
Chi.
go.
Go.
Let's do it one more time. Ichi,
ichi,
ni,
san,
shi, go. And the go is the one you really have to remember.
Okay.
Okay, so this ghost story attaches to a famous mansion, a beautiful old mansion in a place called Unshu on the western coast of Japan. And it's a beautiful mansion that has been in the family of a very important samurai family for many, many years. But even though it's beautiful, there's an ugly story attached to it and a ghost. In Japan and Japanese folklore, there's a kind of a ghost called a vengeful ghost. And that is the ghost of someone who was wronged during their life. And so their spirit gets stuck. Instead of going through purgatory and then being able to be reborn, in the Buddhist idea of reincarnation, it is stuck and haunts, whoever has, or the place and the people where it was wronged until it can get release from that, get some kind of justice or some kind of closure, as we might say. So that's what this story is about, because you see, many hundreds of years ago, the samurai who, the current owner of the mansion, had a family heirloom, a set of 5 beautiful ceramic plates, porcelain. Now, when you think about the plates in your house, how many, you can show me with your fingers, how many are usually in a set? Maybe 4, maybe 8, yeah, or 6 or something. In Japan, it would never be 4 because that number, ichi, ni, san, shi, that's the same sound as the word for death. So this was a set of 5 plates.
Window, yes.
And one day the wife, well, the different people tell this story differently, but some say that the wife of the samurai, she broke one of the plates. But she didn't want to admit, we've all broken something that's valuable and precious to others in our family. And so she hid the evidence. She threw it down, that broken plate, down the well in the yard. But worse than that, to deflect any suspicion, she accused the lowest, most least powerful person in the household of having stolen that plate. And that was a maid, a kitchen maid. And in that time, that kitchen maid couldn't even, she knew she was innocent, but she couldn't even say anything to the lord and the lady of the home, of the house. Now you might think, and they fired her. They beat her, and they eventually fired her. Now, she couldn't get another job. She couldn't go home. It would be so shameful for her family. So she did the only thing she could think of doing, and something that in many Japanese stories happens. She threw herself down the well and died. And after that, every night at midnight, a horrible smell would be in the backyard, the garden of this house, and creepy noises. And when people looked out, there'd be some, transparent, horrible looking figure with dripping black hair and a greenish face, crying and moaning. And this went on and went on and went on, and everybody in the house was terrified. Finally, one of the samurai's friends said, I think nobody could, the samurai tried, to pull out his samurai sword. Well, that doesn't do anything against a ghost. But one of his friends said, I have an idea. I think we have to trick this ghost into going away. And so he hid behind the well and he watched for a couple of nights. And what he noticed was that the ghost every night was trying to count, looking for that plate that she knew she had not stolen. And he heard in her cries, Ichi, ni, san, shi. And when she didn't see that fifth plate, oh. So he made his plan, and you're going to be the samurai, and I'm going to be the ghost. She's going to count to 4, but when she thinks there's not another one, what are you going to say?
Go.
Go. Okay, let's see what happens. So she comes up at midnight. Whoa, looking horrible and counting. Ichi, ni, san, shi.
Go.
Oh.
She went. And that's it. All right. So there's a Japanese ghost story for you. All right. We have Larry Kluger is gonna kindly been on standby. We have time for Larry's story and then for Sally to take us out. So Larry's going to tell us a shorter one of his many wonderful, I'm going to guess, historical stories.
Okay.
What's the matter?
As a major in the United States Army, stationed at a fort in Northern California following the Civil War, I have many duties. I have figured that one of my duties is to try and find a solution to a problem we have of using cannons against the Indians. Different types of cannons have been used by the United States Army throughout the 1800s. Classified by their trajectory, there are guns with a low trajectory, howitzers with a medium trajectory, and mortars with a high trajectory. And each one is very effective when used in the proper situation against traditional armies. Against the Indians, they're not effective. The Indians don't stay in one place. By the time those heavy cannons are set up, loaded, aimed, and the fuse lit, the Indians, who fight from horseback, have moved off and are someplace else on the battlefield. I felt that somehow I might be able to come up with a solution to this problem. One day, while I was working with a small mountain howitzer, an idea came to me. These small howitzers are designed to be broken down so they can be passed by mule over mountains to level spots from where they can be used in battle. Just as I was taking the barrel off of the base and loading it onto the back of the mule, the idea hit me. What if we forgot about the base and attached the barrel to the mule in a manner that it could be fired right off the animal's back? Using cannons against the Indians would be much more effective. Excited about my idea, I rushed back to the fort to share it with the post commander. After scratching his beard for a while, he said, okay, but first, let's test it out before we use it in battle. The very next morning, I strapped the barrel of a howitzer to the back of the mule, and with a muzzle pointing off the animal's backside, I led him to a bluff overlooking a target in the middle of the river. The rear of the mule was facing the target as I backed him up gently to the edge of the bluff. The post commander and a number of other officers were standing behind me in a semicircle as I stepped up and placed a time fuse in the touch hole of the howitzer. When the fuse was set, I lit it and moved back towards the other officers. Now, up to this point, the mule had been taking this all without a fuss, but now he was getting a little antsy. Could have been a number of reasons, the unfamiliar weight of the heavy howitzer, the steep drop off at its rear, the hissing of the lighted fuse, or something else, or a combination of things. Whatever it was, he was definitely uneasy. He turned his head around to try and figure out what was going on. And as he did so, his back turned and the howitzer began to sweep the horizon. That mule was getting very excited and his curiosity was growing more and more intense. In a couple of seconds, he was standing with his 4 feet in a bunch, making 6 revolutions a minute as he chased his tail. The muzzle of the howitzer was threatening certain death to anyone within a half a mile. The post commander took refuge behind a nearby tree while the junior officers slid down the bluff, disregarding any possible damage to their high-priced uniforms. The adjutant, the commander's assistant, ran for the fort as I hit the ground, probably with a loud groan. In a couple minutes, there was a puff of smoke and a dull thud as the mule went somersaulting over the bluff. The poor animal landed in the water, anchored to the riverbed by the heavy howitzer. Meanwhile, the cannonball barreled towards the fort, hitting the chimney on my quarters, rattling adobe bricks down into the parlor and frightening my wife into convulsions. The mule was rescued, and the other officers dusted off the howitzer and put it back into storage. I don't believe the post commander ever filed a report of this incident with the War Department. Thankful for that. It was enough to be embarrassed in front of my whole fort. It would have been another thing to be embarrassed in front of the whole country. I adapted this story from a newspaper article in a newspaper at the time, the Grass Valley Union from Grass Valley, California. It apparently describes an actual military experiment. The names of the officers were omitted. I guess maybe what do they say, to protect the innocent? In this case, it's to protect the guilty. Thank you.
All right, here we are. Oh. Well, another wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you to all our listeners. Thank you to all our tellers. And I wish you a happy, happy Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. We'll be thinking of you and we'll see you in December. So thank you so much. And I'm going to send you off with this little nostalgic story about Halloween. Now the little the little girl with the thick brown braids and the big brown eyes stood and looked at her mother. She was dressed in a cotton ruffled skirt that was hooked, was her mother's, and it was safety pinned under the arms. And over that, she wore a blouse, also her mother's. And the mother had taken the sash from the curtain and had wound it around her waist, and it was a thick cummerbund with a little peplum of the blouse. And then she had taken ribbon and tied up the sleeves so the little girl would have her hands free. Now listen, you look like just a gypsy to me. You look like a perfect gypsy, but we have to put on your red jewelry from Woolworths. And now let's see, oh, and a little lipstick and a little rouge, right? And gold hoop earrings. Every gypsy must have gold hoop earrings. And the mother got out and she put an earring onto the little lobe and it fell right off. Oh, what are we to do? I know. And she put string on the loop, on the hoop, and then hung the jewelry on the little girl's ears. You are a perfect, perfect little gypsy right now. Now go get your bag And just as she did, the doorbell rang. And when they opened the door, there stood Superman and Batman and a doctor and a fairy and a princess and the little girl's next door playmate, Donald, dressed as a pirate with a patch over his eye. All right, children, you all go down the street and don't forget to thank everybody for your candy. And the children started up the hill on New Hope Road. And they went across the street this way and this way and this way and rang the buzzer, and all the parents came out and looked at them, told them how darling they looked and all that. They were aiming to get to the big house at the top of the hill. That was the house of Dr. and Mrs. Current. That was the house where the witch lived on Halloween. It was still sort of light. The sun had just gone below the horizon. The North Star was in the sky, and when they pressed the button, the door opened and there were no lights in the house, only a candle sitting in a pumpkin. And then this big black figure came to the door. It was a witch with a black hat and a black nose. Oh, come right in, children. I've been waiting for you. Now, the little gypsy was very, very frightened. Everybody knew that it was Mrs. Current, the doctor's wife, but the little girl was so frightened she grabbed Donald's hand. It's all right, Sally, it's just Mrs. Current. Come on in, children. And then there was a moaning sound coming from the top of the stairway. Ooh. And this big ghost came down the stairway, and the little girl just was clinging to Donald's hands. Oh my, oh, it's just Dr. Current, for goodness sake. And when he got down to the bottom of the stairs, he pulled off his sheet, and there he was. Come on, children, come on into the kitchen. And they marched on into the kitchen, and there in the center of the kitchen was a great big galvanized pan full of water and apples. And all the kids lined up to bob for apples, and they get down on their knees, and bend over and grab one with your teeth. And now it was the gypsy's turn, and she got down on her knees and she leaned over, but she didn't want to put her face in the water. She didn't want to bite an apple. It might be poisoned. After all, it was Halloween. Donald said, "This is silly, Sally." And he grabbed an apple and then just gave it to her. And all the children went and sat at the kitchen table on each side on benches, and the witch sat at one end and the ghost sat at the other end. And in front of them on each plate was a little sugar pumpkin cookie. And then they all had cocoa with marshmallows floating in it. And you could have seconds too. And Dr. Current told about when he was a boy and his Halloween. And then it got later and darker. And Mr. Current said he would take all the children home, and they marched back up the stairs, up the street. And the little gypsy got to her house, and her mother opened the door and welcomed her in. And she had her bag of candy. And as it was the ritual for them, they sat at the table and they separated the candy in 3 piles. One to take to school, one to keep at home, and one to give to the orphans. Now, the little gypsy had never seen an orphan. She didn't even know what an orphan was. But every year they had this bag for the orphans, which his mother said was a good thing to do. And so Halloween ended. And the little girl went to bed, and she took her bag of candy and hid it in her room. And each day she got to eat 1 piece. And so it was Halloween, October 30th, 1935. Thank you. Bye-bye. Enjoy, enjoy.